Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I am Mr. Kadim Khan and I am a lecturer in the Institute of Computing, Kuwait University of Science and Technology. Today we will take lecture number 16 of the subject of software quality engineering, in which we are going to discuss the test planning and test preparation. Dear students, this topic is very much important because before conducting the test, there must be a proper planning and preparation for software testing. As you know that the software testing is very much important phase in which different defects, errors and different faults of the softwares are identified. So here the planning is very much important. So in these topics we will discuss important test planning and preparation strategies. This is the discussion agenda. It contains different topics including the classification of software failure damages. Here we will discuss how the software damages both the customers and the developers when a certain parts or failure arises in the software system. Then we have the testing models and test cases. Here we will discuss how to construct the model. The model will be in fact the candidate system which will be tested, and then we will perform the model validation and incremental improvement in the models. And this is the main topics where we will discuss the testing, planning and preparation. Here the subtopics have the different subtopics are the goal settings, strategies and techniques, specific objects to be tested, resource planning, model to use, test case preparation, test suite preparation, and at the end we have the organization and management who will be responsible for conducting the software testing. Here, first of all, we discuss what is the significance results when there are certain bugs in the systems. So, there are certain classification of software failure damages. It means that when a software has certain failures, then what sort of the damages will occurs. These are different 8 sort of the damages which are very much important to the customer and user's point of view. That means that these damages are these factors which are essentials to damage the customers and the users software systems. First of all, it endangers the safety of the human beings. When a certain product has a certain drawbacks or the failures, then it can easily damage the safety of the human being. For example, if we are using the robotic systems and there are certain drawbacks or the defects in this particular robotic system, it can easily damage the safety of the human. The safety of human means that the robot can damage the user itself. For example, if we have a certain robotic systems, for example, the system is responsible um, for for hitting the target, or it is a military-based robot systems, and there is certain failures in that particular robotic systems that it can not identify the enemy, but when the system is activated, it in fact hits its own master. So that means that it can damage the human being. Next, efforts on essential organization function with no system replacement capability available. It means that when system is full of certain failures, faults or errors, and immediately we do not have another system which can replace the current systems, then it can affect the organizational functionalities. For example, if we have banking systems and the current system is down due to a certain defects, so the banks should wait for the quality systems, and the no another subsystem is available currently that can replace the previous systems. Number three, it affects the functionality of the firmwares, causing malfunction of the entire systems. So when a certain failures arises in the system, so it will easily affects the functionality of our firmwares. So it will cause the malfunction of the entire systems. For example, if one component is not working, and that component will in fact results in the uh, damage of the entire systems. For example, if a command prompt or the CMD is not working or it has certain defects, so it can affect the entire operating system as well. Number four, affects in essential organizational function but replacement is available. So when the replacement of the product is available, but still the essential organizational functionality will be affected because we have to reinstall the another systems, and the another system will be not a good systems. It cannot be a good candidate system as the original systems. Number five, affects proper functions of the software packages for the business applications. If we have a certain business application, for example, the buying and selling systems, then if that systems contain certain failures, it can easily damage the functionality of the entire system as well. Number six, affects proper functioning of the software packages for the private customers. If we have a certain system which in fact provide the services to the private customers, and that system is down due to the certain damages or due to certain failures, so the entire system or the functionality of the software system will also be affected. Number seven, affects functions of the firmware's application but without affecting the entire systems. So sometimes a little or a small functionality will be affected, but the entire system will still be functionable. So it cannot affect the entire system, but when a certain small function is not working due to the failures, then it can also affect the entire system as well. For example, in the Nadra systems, when the initial entry is not working, then other phases will also be affected. Number 8. Inconveniences to the users but doesn't prevent the accomplishment of the system's capability. Sometimes the damages will be inconvenience to the users, but it cannot or does not damages the entire system as well. So a small errors can be not, in fact, the small errors are not much effective, but still it can be inconvenience to the user. For example, sometimes we see a lot of error messages or certain errors, in fact, dialogues. So when we will ignore certain dialogues, still the system will be functionable, but it is sometimes inconvenience to the end users. Now, there are also classification of the software failures damages, which is very much important for the software developers. The software developers are those people who practically implement the software systems. The first problem for the software system in case of the failures or the different defects in the system is the financial losses. So when a certain problems is prompted by the end users or it is notified by the end users, the software is required to be redeveloped. So that redevelopment is in fact causing the financial problems for the end developers or the software programmers. So it includes damages paid for the physical injuries. For example, if there are certain injuries, that is in fact the injuries which are because of the defects in the software systems, so there should be certain payment systems which should be paid for the physical injuries of the software developers. For example, here are examples that aircraft or auto instrumentations, health equipments and lawsuits. When a certain defects is because if, for example, if the aircraft is crashed due to the software systems or the auto instrumentations are not working due to the defects in the software systems, are certain health equipments, for example, surgery equipments, which are controlled by the software systems. And also the lawsuits means that, for example, if there are certain softwares which are used in the law, or for example in the traffic controlling systems, which in fact control the traffics, and that system has a certain defects, then the accidents will occurs. Similarly, aircraft will be crashed, and the auto instrumentations, for example, if we are driving our car and there is a software which is driving the cars, and the car is immediately met with a certain accidents, then it can physically damage the users. So that is in fact the damage which occurs physically to the developers. So that is in fact the financial loss which is for which the payment is required. Similarly, damages paid to organization for malfunctioning of the software. So if the software is redeveloped or it is maintained, that the organization has to spend certain amount on the maintenance of the software. So that is also one sort of the financial problem for the software development organizations. So company have many layers on the staff. So basically, in fact, companies in fact spends different amounts on the staff. So when we have to maintain softwares, they have to redevelop, and there are certain cost that will occurs on the maintenance. So that's why there are certain financial losses occurs when we are meeting with such certain softwares which are full of the failures and defects. Similarly, purchasing cost reimbursement to the customers. So sometimes if the software has certain errors or defects, we have to perform the reimbursements for the customers, because that is the in fact mistakes on the developer's side. For example, developer is not working properly, and developers is in fact creating a software or developing the software which is full of the errors. So developers has to reimburse the amounts to the customers. High maintenance expenses for the period of the failure systems. If you are using the CAD and CAM application, that is the computer aided designs and computer aided manufacturing, we requires high maintenance expenses for the failure of the software system as well. So that failures is on the programmer sides, and that expenses also have to be reimbursed by the programmers or the developers. Number two, non-quantitative damages. These are certain damages which cannot express them in the quantitative numbers, but these are the qualitative damages. These damages include expected to affect failure sales. So due to certain defects in the system, automatically the future sales will be affected for a system or for a particular company. For example, if the company reputation is damaged because the company is producing a certain software products which are full of failures and defects, so automatically it will affect the future sales of the software development company. Similarly, substantially reduce the current sales, and not only it affects the future sales, but also it affects the current sales of the companies. Now, before conducting the planning of the software testings, we require the testing models and test cases. The testing models in fact the candidate model which we develop to test the systems, and the test cases are different test suites which includes different input output and also the different values that will be provided to the system, and based on different condition the software is required to be tested. So these are two generic steps which is in fact used for the testing model and test cases. Now we can develop or construct our testing models from information source identification and data collections. First, we have to identify the information source here. The information source includes all those informations which is required to create the testing models, and also the test data means that the data which is will act as an input and that expected output, which is very much important for the test cases. So the informations and test data are in fact affected by both what is required for the software specific models and the availability of the project environment. So we will in fact take the data from the specific models and the project environments. For example, in the usage-based statistical testing, we take the informations from the actual in-field anticipated used by the target customers. That means that when we perform the usage-based statistical testing, in which we identified the user patterns of the software's usage, then it means that we will take the data from the end user based patterns. So it in fact we gather from the customers operational profiles. Operational profile means that how the customer uses this software, what are the important functions that are mostly used by the software in the last specific amount of time, and the specific based on this testing as well. So for example, in the white box testing, the tested unit provides the information source which can be analyzed to construct our testing models. So the testing models is in fact for in the case of the white box testing, the particular unit which will be used by the end user is acted as the user based statistical testing. And secondly, analysis and initial model construction. After taking the input from the user-based statistical testing, then we analyze this particular information and then we conduct the initial models which will be act as a candidate model for the software testing. The information and data that are collected from these steps are then analyzed to construct the software testing models. So here the different experts and all those people which are familiar with the testing models, their opinion is in fact obtained, and then we in fact technically and constructs the models, and then we in fact also create the test cases. So here different people are required for these steps, and this step is very much important, and also it is the hardest uh, phase of the software testing, because we requires a certain models which are in fact will act as a candidate model, and that model should be similar to the final model which are is implemented by the end by the programmers. So here we will in fact requires to automate the model so that the human intelligence expertise can be required, and that model will be in fact the candidate model of the end users. Now here we will discuss test planning and test preparation strategies. So these are the generic steps here. So they can be in fact certain steps which are required to perform the test planning and test preparation. So first we will in fact use different informations identification strategies and the data collections methods to create the models. For this purpose, usage-based statistical testing techniques is used, or the white box testing techniques is required here. In the usage-based statistical techniques, in fact here the information is obtained from an actual usage by the target customers, and this information is the operational profiles of the user, that how the user is using the particular software systems, what is the most important functions that are mostly used by the software by the user. And secondly, the WBT, which means that white box testing techniques. So here the information is obtained based on the unit under test. Units is means that the particular one functionality which is required to be tested. And next is to analyze the initial model construction. So here, first of all, we will perform analysis and then the initial model will be constructed. The analysis in fact performed the expert peoples which have a certain intelligence in informations about the model. So here it required the human expertise and intelligence to perform the analysis and then initial model is constructed. And next third steps model validation and improvement. Here the iterative process is adopted to validate and improve the model. If there are certain problems in the model, then improvement is performed here and the maintenance is required for the model. Now, model validation and improvements. So, incremental improvements is a certain strategies which is performed in the iterative fashions. In this important steps, particular for the large objects it means that for the large products, for the function or usages, the iterative procedure is adopted to fix inaccuracy or the problems which are in fact occurring in the initial model or the early version of the candidate models. Dear students, remember that the model will be another software systems which will be exactly a copy or equivalent to our current system. Now, because the final product is not developed, so that's why we will test the current or the candidate model. And the testing is in fact certain phase which is in fact occurs in every software's steps. For example, in the requirements, we can also test the designs of the system where the functionality is incomplete, and so that's why we need to develop the model. And need also it requires to define and distinguish the static test cases and the dynamic test cases run. So we require two types of test cases. One is called the static test cases and the next one is the dynamic test cases. And so that is the test runs. So in the test cases is the in fact the collection of the entities and related information that allow a test to be performed. So basically a test case means that certain input and output what should be the expected output of the systems when a particular test is executed or it is run. So a test case may be the static test case. In the static test cases, the result is unchanged and that should be very much specific to the particular products. For example, if the system is in fact developing the automobiles products, so basically each and every automobiles has the same shapes. So that's why the static test case is required there. And another one is the dynamic unit test cases. So here a test run is a dynamic unit of specific activities in overall testing sequence on the selected test objects. Each test run is also called the N attempts. So here the dynamic output is required. Means that when us users will enter a different input, then the different output is expected. So the dynamic test run is that certain runs which is based on run times. Now the test planning and preparations has certain activities. First activity is called the goal settings. In the goal settings we identified the objective of the software testings. So basically the customer's quality perspectives is analyzed and the customer expectations is identified and that is the goal of the software testing. So in here we will provide the different quality attributes. For example, the usability, efficiency, portability, security. These are different quality attributes and these attributes are in fact a certain quality attributes which are in fact the expectation and the quality perspective of the customers. So here we will identify different sort of the quality attributes and overall quality engineering process is performed here. Also, we will identify different risks here. Basically, the risk is the certain factors which can easily affect the quality, cost, and schedule of the project. The quality is in fact a certain things which is affected by the risks, and the risks are the factors which affects the quality. So also the goal setting is affected by the costs. For example, if you are performing the exhaustive testing, that cost will be quite high, and if we have to test only a particular unit, then a less amount of cost is required here. The next steps after the goal setting is the identification of the strategies and the techniques for creating the test planning and preparation. Here, different strategies and techniques are identified which will be used to accomplish the test missions. So here we will in fact adopt different sort of the techniques which will be required to perform the software testings. The test strategies should be specific how technically will be used. So in fact it should be technically, and automatically the testing is a technical steps, so that's why the techniques will be required a certain, for example the technique will be very much technical, and there are many compilers and interpreters with us that perform software testing, so the technical strategy should be used here. There are certain characteristics of the strategy which will be adopted. For example, it should be diversified. Diversified means that it should have multiple versions and it should be different from the previous ones. And also it should be very much advanced. Second one, it should be risk focused. The risk focused means that the strategy should identify different sort of the factors which affects the quality, cost and schedule of the product, and that is the risk in fact. Next, characteristics of the strategy and technique should be product specific. All these strategies, for example, should be according to the product. For example, if you are using the Java system, we will perform the JUnit testing of the product. So that should be specific to the product. Similarly, if you are using are testing the software product which is developed in the Microsoft environment, then we will use the XUnit testings. So strategy should be practical as well. Means that we have to perform the practical software testings. In the next lectures, we will in fact show you the practical testing tips. That is how to test your systems in Java as well as in the Microsoft products. And also the strategy should be defensible. Defensive means that the test strategy should in fact avoid all sort of the errors and then it will catch the errors. So that is the defensibles. Third steps for test planning and preparation is the specific objects to be tested. Here we will identify the particular products objects which is required to be tested. And the objects may be the functional skills, that is the black box testing, or it should be the internal codes, that is the white box testing. So when we perform the black box testings, that means that we have to test the functionality of the systems, and it can be functional test. And when we perform the white box testing, that will be the internal structure of the programming code of the system. The next one is the resource planning. Here we will identify or plan different resources which will be required to perform the testing. It includes the human resources and staff as well, and also another resources, for example compilers and interpreters and others editors like taking or compiling the notes. It means that it is the availability of resources also affects the strategies. If the resources are not available with us, that it can affect the testing process. The simple models, for example checklist, are the partitions is required as a resources. For example, we will make certain tables, and then we will perform a checklist that whether this resource is available or not with us. Next five step is the models to use. As in the previous slides, we have thoroughly discussed how to develop the model or what should be characteristics of the model. So the model is the candidate software system which will be required to test the systems. The model is very much important because sometimes the system is not available with us. That's why we have to test the model. For example, when the database is ready for us but the coding is not available, then we will test that database based on our models. So here it should be different effectiveness and applicability. The model should be different effectiveness. That means that also it should be very much applicable. It means that the model should be relevant to the product. It should be the copy of the product. Also, model has the cost benefit analysis that, for example, the cost should be not much more than the benefits. If the costs are too much more than the benefits, that means the model is useless. Also, it requires adaptation to the existing models. That model should be very much practical and it should be according to the user's usage behavior. So that's why it should be adopted to the organization where the software system is required to be used. So the model should be very much adaptive model and the customer should be familiar with that particular model. Next phase in the test planning and preparation is test case preparation. Remember that the test case is a certain sequence in which the system is tested. It includes the input and output and the expected output as well. So here the test case contains actual runs, which is the usage based testing. The actual runs is in fact the runs which is in fact used by the end users, and it is in fact provided by the operational profile of the users. Next is the implementation bits, that is the white box testing. So here we will test the code of the systems and that is called the white box testing. Also, the test cases should be prepared from the specifications, that means the requirement specification documents, and that will be the black box testings in which the functionality of the system is required to be tested. The model or the test cases should be record and replay, means that all the test um, process should be recorded, and when it is required to replay, then it should be able to be replayed, so that we have to test the test cases, or we have to in fact analyze the test cases, then the test cases should be recorded and it should be replayed. Also, the test cases should be formal models. So the test cases is in fact prepared from the formal models which include the operational profiles of the user or the CFT. CFT is the critical functionality testings. All those functions which are critical to the end user that is required to be tested, and these functions are the most important and the main functions of the systems. Test cases can be prepared from construction manually from the scratch. From the scratch means that from the very start, all new test cases will be created manually, or it can be created automatically generated. Some software systems automatically creates the test cases, or there are certain tools which are in fact automatically creating the test cases. So these tools should be used in the Visual Studio. There is the unit testing strategy which automatically generates the test cases from the code. Also, the test cases is prepared from selecting from the existing one for the legacy products. For the current products, we can create or we can adopt the previous test cases which are created for the legacy products or for the old products. And the test cases consist of both legal and illegal cases. Both legal cases means that all these test cases which are in fact created are in fact data gathered from the customers, and illegal test cases are those cases which are created by our own experts people, and they can be not in fact the exact picture of the customer's minds, but it can also be a useful test cases. Next one is the 7 steps of the test planning and preparation, in which the test suite's preparation is performed here. Basically, test suite is the collection of multiple test cases. So there are more than one test cases in the test suites. And when the test cases is conducted or it is executed or it is run, then the test sequence is created, which in fact is also called the test suites. So the test suites includes multiple sort types of the test cases and also their results as well. For example, the usage-based statistical testing is in fact planned here, and each and every operational profiles of the user is identified here, and then the model is constructed, and the model is in fact the proportion to the individual usage probabilities. That means that how the user is using the particular software products and what functionality is mostly used for the particular times. So here the test suited is in fact depends on specific testing techniques, which is based on the usage based statistical testing, which is the operational profiles with the probabilities. Here the probability means that what sort of the operations are mostly used by the users for the particular period of time, and also the coverage criteria is adopted here. Okay. The coverage criteria is the CPT. CPT means that component based testing, in which we identified that how the coverage is performed by the software systems in terms of the different programming steps. If all the programming steps is covered, that means that all the program is properly executed. So that is the coverage criteria. For example, if a certain loop is useless and that is not executed, or that loop is always false, then means that that loop is unnecessary and that loop should be eliminated from the code. So the coverage criteria in fact covers the each and every statements in the program. Number 8, organization and management. Here, the test planning and preparation contains an important phase in which the organization and management is identified. So here, all the organizations and the management requires who runs the organization is their feedback is obtained from them. So one concrete example is the use of the following attributes for the IBM products in the system testing phase, which is in fact identified by the time in the 1998. It includes three different parameters. First one is the SC, which is the scenario class. Second one is the SN, which is the scenario number, and VN is the variation number with a particular scenario. SC is the scenario class. It means that here we identified the scenario of the users. Scenario means that how the user is using particular systems and what is the scenario of the usage. So it includes the class of the usage. For example, when a user is uploading the image or the video, that is the particular one type of scenario, and when the user is downloading the video or the image, that is another scenario class. So every function has a particular classes. For example, printing is one of the class. Similarly, searching is another class here. So every functionality or the scenarios include the class, which is called SC or the scenario class. Second one is the SN, which is the scenario number. So the scenario number is the unique identifier of the scenario class. Every scenario has a particular number, and that scenario number is very much important when we write the test cases, which in fact identifies the particular functionality. Similarly, we have the VN, which is the variation number with a particular scenario. So every scenario includes the VN. For example, in the printing, we have the print preview, which is one the variation of the printing. So here we identified a certain variations are the changes in the one types of the functionalities here, and that is called the variation number. So basically the value of the SNVN is in fact from the 1 to 99. So we provide different values to the particular scenario number and the variation number. So these are generally ordered in a rough correspondence to the expected execution order, and that ranges from the 1 to 99. And the 1 to 99 means that that is in fact the particular weightage of the scenario. Dear student, this is the end of this lectures. If you have want to study more about this topics, then you can study these two books. These are very good books. And the first book is the practical model based testing, a test tools approach for the mark Uting and the Bruno Legates. This is very much a practical books, so it will give you the practical idea. In the next lecture, we will also perform some practical testings. So this book is very much important for you. And the second book is component based software testing with the UML by Hans Gerhardt Gross. So this book is in fact providing you the idea about the models using the UML. And also, very much importantly, if you have any question about these topics, you can ask through the email. And my email is m.kadim@kust.edu.pk, which is in here in the bottom section of the slides. And I will wait for your questions and will respond immediately as soon as I get them. Thank you very much.